Islands and its affiliated islets have been China's inherent territory since ancient times. No matter what others do or say, the fact that the Diaoyu Islands are an integral part of China has not changed, and China's resolve and determination in safeguarding its sovereignty and territory will not be shifted.
A big part of Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's visit to Australia nearly a year ago to meet with Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull was to further ties between the two countries.
We share democratic values and a common interest.
Japan and Australia entered an economic partnership agreement in 2015. Now they're expected to focus on regional security by signing a visiting forces agreement. It's basically a legal arrangement that allows foreign forces to visit, train, and operate in another country's territory.
For instance, if you think about a North Korea scenario, which is not unlikely in the foreseeable future, that would allow Australian forces to operate from Japanese territory if they have to.
The move is significant for Japan because it represents an attempt to deepen the country's international security ties beyond the United States. For Australia, analysts say it's part of the government's plan since 2009 to increase its defense capabilities.
Australia is sending a signal that it also intends to further improve its relationship with Japan, but also that it intends to play a more active role in Northeast Asia, which is quite an important strategic area for Australia.
Australia's engagement with Asia has become more complex and more interesting and more multifaceted, and I think that's a very good thing.
The visiting forces agreement would better position the two countries to deal with a changing international environment.
The rise of China, the uncertainty over the regional power dynamics, uncertainty about US leadership in the region.
So there's challenges, but it's more about the opportunities that come from a multilateral engagement that we have with the region.
The agreement would also make it easier for Japan and Australia to engage in joint training exercises and disaster relief missions. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
Now, Beijing issues a stern warning to Tokyo after Japan announced that it may patrol alongside the U.S. in the South China Sea region. China's Defense Ministry spokesman Yang Yujun warned that any Japanese involvement in joint patrol or joint exercises in waters administered by China will be just like playing with fire. The spokesman noted that China will not stand idly in case that happens. The warning followed Tokyo's announcement this month that it would increase its engagement in the South China Sea through joint training with the U.S. Navy, exercises with regional navies, and capacity-building assistance to coastal nations. Beijing asserts sovereignty over almost all of the South China Sea, dismissing partial claims by its Southeast Asian neighbors. It rejects any intervention by Japan in the waterway as well.
Sea power. What's projected by the presence of a battle-ready aircraft carrier and its accompanying strike group. Both USS John C. Stennis and USS Ronald Reagan strike groups have joined forces in conducting dual aircraft carrier operations in the Philippine Sea. To help strengthen the ties between them, the ships and aircraft assigned to both aircraft carrier strike groups began coordinating operations in international waters.
Working with Rear Admiral Hitchcock and Carrier Strike Group 3 during their deployment to the Indo-Asia-Pacific regions has been a great opportunity for us to train on how we would operate multiple carrier strike groups in a contested environment.
The strike groups practice war-fighting techniques which could be used in modern conflict.
No other Navy can concentrate this much combat power on one sea and synchronize the activities of over 12,000 sailors, 140 aircraft, 6 combatants, and 2 carriers. It was a truly impressive sight, and it's an important operational capability.
Flight quarters, command all flight quarter stations.
Air defense drills, surveillance, air combat training, and long-range strikes were a handful of the combined exercises.
All this ahead full, 095 RPM indicating S4, sir.
U.S. Navy aircraft carriers have conducted dual carrier operations in the Western Pacific, including the South China Sea, East China Sea, and Philippine Sea, for several years, and task force commanders expect to continue these evolutions, supporting security and stability in the Indo-Asia-Pacific for years to come. Petty Officer Elijah Lenar, aboard USS Ronald Reagan, at sea.
Mr. Billington, what is the Japanese game plan here?
Well, keep in mind this is a response from China to a statement by the newly appointed Defense Minister, Tomomi Inada, when she was in Washington a few weeks ago. She's a well-known anti-China hawk. I think you have to start with the idea that Japan under Abe is an enigma. There are, in a sense, two Japans functioning right now. On the one hand, Abe has completely broken from Obama and the U.S. by establishing extremely close relations with Russia and actually maintaining close relations with China on economic issues. They recognize that the future of their nation depends upon the development of Eurasia, and that the BRICS nations, Russia, China, India, and so forth, are the future, as opposed to the economic disaster which is now tearing the Western world to pieces. On the other hand, as you're bringing up here, he wants to maintain his relations with the U.S., and especially militarily. And this is, of course, seen as a threat from China, not so much because of Japan, in fact, but because the U.S. is threatening war. Ash Carter, the defense secretary, this last week openly talked about completely revamping and upgrading the entire nuclear stockpile in the United States. Why? Because he said there's a threat of war from Russia and North Korea. Now, this is a lie, and the attempt here is to justify the encirclement of Russia and China by the Obama administration, backed by the British, in order to try to break up this emerging pro-development alliance centered around China and Russia. And this is what's behind their very, very serious concern about the U.S. threats. So it's in that sense that they're looking at Japan's statement that they were going to join the U.S. in these patrols in the South China Sea. And keep in mind that even that is somewhat of an empty threat, because the way Inada put it was that they were going to work with the countries in the region to militarily patrol against the potential China threat or their aggression and so forth. Well, that's nonsense. I mean, as everyone now knows, the Philippines have completely broken from the U.S. military posture, not broken from the U.S., but broken from the U.S. military posture. The new President Duterte, in fact, just yesterday, in Vietnam, and of course Vietnam and the Philippines were the two countries that Obama was counting on as allies against China. But Duterte declared yesterday in Vietnam that the upcoming exercise between the U.S. and the Philippines is the last one there will be. He doesn't want to be any part of a threat of confrontation with China. And the Vietnamese are as well, reestablishing very close military ties with China. So it's an empty threat. It's foolish for Abe to allow any potential joint military patrols in the South China Sea. They're not even adjacent to the South China Sea. But I think it has to be put in that broader context in which our effort, Mr. LaRouche and our organization and our friends in China and in the Philippines and in Japan, are pushing Japan to act upon its actual self-interest, which Abe is in collaboration with Russia, and to extend that much more solidly to collaboration with China. So that's where that stands.
Very well. We'll leave it there at that. But of course, as always, Mr. Billington, we appreciate you taking your time to share your expertise with us.
マティス長官から尖閣諸島は日本の施政下にある領域であり、日米安全保障条約5条の適用範囲である。米国は尖閣諸島に対する日本の姿勢を損なおうとするいかなる一方的な行動にも 反対する旨が表明されました。
Today, the Minister and I discussed the security situation, and I made clear that our long-standing policy on the Senkaku Islands stands. The United States will continue to recognize Japanese administration of the islands, and as such, Article 5 of the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty applies.
That you felt that the counter-ISIL...
From the threat of nuclear and missile provocations by North Korea to increasingly confrontational behavior by China in the East and South China Seas, we recognize the changing security situation. These include relocating Marines to Guam and reducing our footprint on Okinawa while maintaining the capabilities needed to keep Japan and the region secure. During my discussions here, we agreed that our mutual efforts to build the Fatima replacement facility will continue, as it is the only solution that will enable the United States to return the current Marine Corps Air Station at Fatima to Japan. So our focus, immediate focus, perhaps principally on the North Korea nuclear and ballistic missile threat, but we also must stand together in support of the international order that is rules-based